I first met Senator Lipman in the 1970s, and my first impression had to be formed by what I knew about her. And what I knew about her, it wasn't Senator Lipman, it was Dr. Lipman. She was a woman of dignity, she was elegant, she could be soft-spoken, and I didn't yet know how damn tough she could be.
My father's name was John Wesley Moore. He was born in Georgia, LaGrange, Georgia, to be exact. My mother's maiden name was Annabelle Torian. I had 2 brothers and 1 sister. My mother was a teacher and she taught us at home, and we skipped some grades and we went to college early. And so I went to Talladega College in Alabama first.
Evelyn Wynona Moore earned a master's degree in French from Atlanta University and taught French at Morehouse College, where she tutored a young Martin Luther King Jr. She received a Rockefeller grant to study at Columbia University and a Fulbright fellowship to study in France, where she met and married Dr. Matthew Lipman.
There were certainly many states where it would have been unlawful because her late husband, Dr. Matthew Lipman, who was a professor, was white, and obviously she was a woman of color. But they did marry and had 2 children. They moved to Montclair because Matt was a professor there, but for Wynona it wasn't so easy. Ultimately, she became a professor at Essex County College and had a long, long relationship with them teaching, and I think that was satisfying to her. She was an educator at heart. She became active in the PTA. People said, why don't you run for office? She became the head of the Freeholder Board in Essex County, and she ran for the Senate, and she stayed there for almost 30 years.
In 1971, Lipman narrowly defeated incumbent Republican Senator Milton Walder by a margin of 928 votes to become New Jersey's first African-American woman state senator.
Senator Lipman met racism and sexism on a level you could not imagine. And I would say to her, Senator Lipman, I would have said I would have never. And she used to say to me, don't worry, baby, because she came from the South. There's more than one way to skin a cat.
She was the only woman for a while, and there are a lot of laws on the books that are gender-related. So she had to get with the men who were in charge of these to change some of these laws. So it became necessary to work with people who believed in her, but who didn't believe in what she believed in. But she had a type of personality. That's why they call her the Steel Magnolia. She was very calming, very charming, but when you stepped on her, she knew how to fight back. She didn't hesitate when it was time to speak up.
District lines in New Jersey were redrawn to comply with the U.S. Supreme Court's one-man, one-vote mandate, and Senator Lipman's district was eliminated. She moved from Montclair to Newark to keep her seat at a time when Newark was still recovering from the economic and political turmoil of the 1960s.
By the time Wynona got to Newark, we had an African-American mayor. Ken Gibson had been elected in 1970. Newark had experienced the rebellion in 1967, and that served as a precursor to the political maturation of the black community in the Newark area. The times were tough economically, and federal funds were not plentiful, but Newark was a quiet place politically.
The stark difference in her Newark political outreach was that there was more on the line. So you were meeting people who were confronting issues of survival. Domestic violence was a survival issue for women. Income inequality was a survival issue. These weren't issues on the margin for her. These were integral to how she saw herself as a leader for women and children.
She was a force in getting the New Jersey Senate to recognize that it was not a bastion for white males. It was for everybody.
There comes a point in time, and I think it spoke to her, like, I have to be the change of what I believe is an ill of society. And I think that was really part of the era of the civil rights and the women's movement of the 60s. It came a point that many of us as a society started to really believe we can continue to be upset about the injustices that we see, or we could be the one that makes that difference.
During her 27 years in the Senate, Wynona Lipman never stopped fighting on behalf of her constituents and advocating for programs that benefited those in need.
She was a gem, a jewel, and she was treasured by her constituents. She never won an election with less than 83% of the vote. I mean, that tells you something throughout her political career.
The Domestic Violence Act, first and foremost, said that, if you commit violations of these crimes, which if you were a stranger, they would clearly be crimes, that it would be labeled domestic violence. The police would have to intervene. The woman who was being battered would have protections. And most importantly, they could go immediately to a municipal court judge to get a restraining order. And just to get that was a huge achievement, a huge victory, and I think important for the legislature to start to look at these issues in a different way, to understand that these issues had not been talked about, but they were real societal problems.
When Wynona first rented an apartment going from Montclair to Newark, she rented it as a single woman. And what was so interesting about her conversation about fair housing, it was really centered around gender inequality as much as it was racial inequality, and specifically how single brown women are impacted who have less access to capital, less access to their own credit history, and renting apartments. And she understood that housing was one of the core issues that affected every single constituent that she came into contact with.
Wynona Lipman was at once a gentle friend and a fierce advocate for legal services for her entire tenure in the legislature. She was well known to every governor that served during her tenure to be the go-to person, the person in the legislature who would see at the end of the day that if legal services needed increased funding to serve more people, it would be there and Wynona would take care of it.
People related pay equity to be almost like bra burning, I guess, from the 70s. Like we're letting you work and you want to make the same amount of money? How dare you? What's wrong with you?
We worked so hard to get a bill through to create a task force on equitable compensation, to really look at that in the state. What could we do? How could we recognize the worth of everybody's job? And we still have an awful lot of work to do. On every issue, she worked so hard that she did get more bills passed than anyone else. I doubt anyone's going to meet that record in a long time.
Senator Lipman passed away in 1999. She will be remembered for her unwavering commitment to equal justice, her tenacity, and her wry, understated humor.
She could talk with the common man and walk with kings and governors and presidents. She was special. Wynona was special.
Here she was on her deathbed. The hospice people, they were there. So I got a call from her daughter, Karen. You got to come over. We're having a problem with the air conditioner. So I come running over. And I went upstairs. I looked at the air conditioner. I said, no, the problem is that it's leaning in the wrong direction. You got moisture leaking into the building when it should be leaking out of the building. So Wynona said, Jim, that's not right. I said, excuse me? She said, no, you don't. I said, no, you got to adjust it. No, you don't. So the people, they asked Karen, said, what's their problem? She said, that's nothing new. They do this all the time. Next week she was dead. Until the end, she had that spirit.
She transformed that Senate. When you walk through that hall and they say, "Hi, Senator Gill," in a way that is both respectful and recognize your power, they do it because Senator Lipman walked that walk first.